Hello guys, Luna here. So today I'm going to be featuring my own build for WvW Roaming. The build itself is named the High Risk Roamer, and I've already made a guide on it over at intothemist.com, so if you want to go check out a written version of the guide, you can follow the link in the description box down below. I'm going to do like a two-segment part on this video. First of all, I'm going to go through the basics of the build, armor, traits, weapons, and some combos. And then I'm going to be featuring some footage with me using the build afterwards with some commentary, so enjoy. So this is going to be an in-depth guide, so if you don't want to sit around and listen to me talking for 10-15 minutes, I'm going to put up an image somewhere here so you can just pause the video, and it'll give you all the details that you need to know about the build. Let's get started. So for this build we're going to be running completely full Berserker, both armor, weapons, and trinkets. On the armor we're going to be running with the Superior Rune of Lissa for the extra precision, Conde duration, and whenever we use an elite skill we convert fab conditions into boons. The 6th bonus on this rune set is really important as it's one of our only 2 ways of Conde cleansing Condes. On the Greatsword we're going to be running the Superior Sigil of Leeching for the extra lifesteal, and Superior Sigil of Energy for the extra dodge roll, which synchronizes really well with the Greatsword's whirlwind, so we sort of have 2 evasive skills to use whenever you swap to the Greatsword. On the sword we have the Superior Sigil of Hydromancy, which will damage and chill nearby foes when you swap to the weapon while in combat. This sigil is really great for fighting blind spam classes, as it'll remove any blind that you have on you if you weapon swap close enough to your enemy. On the shield we have the Superior Sigil of Geomancy, which will inflict 3 stacks of bleeding to all nearby foes when you swap to the weapon while in combat. This sigil synchronizes extremely well with Hydromancy, as the Hydromancy will remove, say, blind or ages on your foe before the Geomancy procs, meaning that you can swap and always make sure to get the Geomancy on your target. So trait-wise we're gonna be running 44024. The first trait in strength is Reckless Dodge, which will do an unblockable attack at the end of a dodge roll. Even though the tooltip doesn't state so, this damage is actually unblockable, which means it can hit through ages and blocks alike. Therefore, you can also use the dodge rolls offensively if you want to. So for the adept trait, you want to be taking either Death from Above, which is a trait that does an AoE knockback whenever you take fall damage. This doesn't have any limited amount of targets, so if you jump into a group of enemies, you will knock them all back as long as they don't have any stability or other crowd control ability, anti-crowd control abilities to stop you with. Or instead of Death from Above, you can take Great Fortitude, which is a power to vitality conversion, which will grant you about 1500 extra HP. And if you don't want to run that either, you can take Short Temper, which grants you might stacks every single time you are blocked by Ages or a block skill. The thing about this skill is that it also grants you Adrenaline, so instead of, say, you getting blocked and not getting anything for it, you will still get that little extra Adrenaline while being blocked by an opponent, as well as stacking mites. So for this third passive trait we have Building Momentum, which will grant you extra endurance every single time you successfully land a burst skill versus an opponent. The amount of endurance you get from the trait is about half a dodge roll, so during a melee fight that might actually in some cases be the difference between you dying or you getting away and dodging that hard-hitting skill. And finally, for the last trait in strength, we have Slashing Power, which is just a raw damage increase on our Greatsword, since Greatsword is our main weapon for damage in this build. So in the arms trait line, we're going to be picking up Precise Strikes, which has a chance whenever we critical hit to apply bleeding to our targets. Even though this trait doesn't do that much by itself, it's really great for countering other classes' passive Conde removal. For the adept trait in arms, we're going to be picking up Furious Speed. This trait has a 100% chance on critical hit to give us Swiftness. This trait is really great for stacking Swiftness and reapplying Swiftness that has been stolen or corrupted. This is really important for the build as you want to stick to your target as much as possible to be able to combo them and pin them down. So for the second passive trait in arms we have Critical Burst, which is just a flat increase in critical chance on burst kills. This synchronizes really well along with the Arcing Slice Execute. Given the overall precision you'll have on a full Circuit spec on this build, you'll be sitting on around 90% crit chance when you use burst skills, which makes it a nice execute. For the last traits in arms, we're going to be running Forceful Greatsword, which reduces your overall cooldowns on your Greatsword skills. This is really nice for the Whirlwind attack, Rush, and the 100 Blades, as you'll have those skills, at least 100 Blades and Whirlwind, you'll almost always have up when you swap to the Greatsword, which is really important for the build. Also, every single time you critical hit with the Greatsword, you will also get a Might Stack. This also applies to every single hit you do to your opponent while you have the Greatsword out. So traits like your Reckless Dodge will also grant Might Stacks when you critical hit with them. In the Tactics trait line, we're going to be picking up Determined Revival. Even though this trait doesn't really do that much for this build, as it just grants you extra toughness while reviving people, it's still nice to have if you were to have to revive an ally, though I would not recommend it as you're fairly squishy and would probably be forced to use cooldowns if you did. So in the Adapt trait, we're going to be taking Leg Specialist, which is like a key factor in this build, as it does a short duration of Immobilize every single time you cripple an opponent. With this current weapon set, we have 3 different ways of applying cripple to our enemies. First being Blade Trail, second being Savage Leap, and the third one being the third auto attack on the sword auto attacks. The reason this trait is so important is that it's adding to your overall lockdown potential, which makes it a lot easier to catch up to foes and lock them down for combos. So for the passive trait in Discipline, we have Versatile Rage, which grants you 5 strikes of Adrenaline every single time you swap weapons. This is really essential to the build, as this is the only source of Adrenaline gain that we have except from the passive from Signal Rage and hitting people directly with attacks. So in other words, if you don't attack people, you're not going to gain any Adrenaline unless you weapon swap a lot. For the Adapt trait, we're going to be taking Signet Mastery for the lower cooldown on Signet of Rage and Signet of Stamina. These are the only 2 Conde removal skills we have on this build, so it's really essential to have as low cooldown as possible on those skills to have as much Conde removal as possible. For the second passive trait in Discipline, we have Fast Hands, which reduces our recharge on weapon swap from 10 seconds to 5 seconds while we're in combat. This synchronizes extremely well with the Versatile Rage that I mentioned earlier, giving us a lot of extra Adrenaline while we're in combat and weapon swapping a lot. And for the final trait in Discipline, we have Mobile Strikes, which breaks any duration of Immobilize every single time you use a movement skill. This means that every single time I use Rush, Whirlwind Attack, Savage Leap, or Shield Bash, it will break any duration of Immobilize, regardless of how long it is. Overall, this is just a really great trait from preventing yourself from getting pinned down and CC'd to death. So utility-wise, you're going to be running Healing Signet as your healing skill. On the first utility slot, you want to take either Endure Pain or Berserker Stance. I sometimes take Berserker Stance when I'm fighting really heavy Conde classes. As the second utility, you want to take Signet of Stamina. This is a really good signet for the passive endurance regeneration that you get, along with the full Conde cleanse if you need to use it. And for the third and final utility, we have Fear Me, which you can opt to swap out for Dahlia Signet if you don't feel completely comfortable playing a, say, spec with no stability on it. And for our elite skill, we're going to be running Signet Rage, which is going to help us out really much, along with the, say, traded cooldown reduction on it, as well as Lycerans, to give us that little extra Conde cleanse that we need. For the food, you want to run Quake Cake or Prickly Pear Pies, along with Toxic Sharpening Stones. Prickly Pear Pies are the best choice here, even though they're really expensive to make, as they give you both the condition duration and the percent chance on critical to steal HP from your foe, whereas Koi Cakes only give you the condition duration and flat Conde damage. The Toxic Sharpening Stones can just give you some extra power, as well as a plus 10% condition duration. So overall, you'll gain 50% condition duration from your food, which is really important. If you want to take the, say, Conde duration to a max, if you say put on these, we'll see, I'll gain 75%. If you want to take that to the max with this build, you could potentially also run giver weapons. Each, say, weapon would then grant you plus 10% condition duration, so if you put those on, you'd end up on 95% condition duration, which is the max that you'd get with these sigils and this these traits on this build. And this is really fucking strong when you look at the immobilized duration that you can stack up on it.